This is a hypothetical scenario based on publicly available naval doctrine and known military capabilities. Nothing you are about to hear represents classified information or actual operational events. Picture this: a gray morning somewhere in the North Atlantic. The radar operator aboard a United States Navy destroyer stares at his screen, watching a contact that should not be there. A Russian warship sailing directly toward the carrier strike group, ignoring all warnings, all radio calls, all international protocols. The bridge goes silent. Every sailor knows what this means. But here's the part that changes everything. What happened next was not what Moscow planned, and it certainly was not what anyone watching expected. The ocean is not a simple battlefield. It is a three-dimensional environment where sound travels in unpredictable ways, where temperature layers can hide entire submarines, and where a single miscalculation can trigger consequences that ripple across continents. To understand what unfolded in this hypothetical confrontation, you first need to understand the rules of the game that both sides were playing. A carrier strike group is not just a collection of ships sailing together. It is a networked system of sensors, weapons, and decision-making nodes designed to project power across thousands of miles of ocean. At the center sits the aircraft carrier itself, a floating airbase capable of launching dozens of combat aircraft within minutes. But the carrier is also the most valuable target in the formation. Everything else exists to protect it. Surrounding the carrier are guided missile destroyers and cruisers, each one carrying vertical launch cells packed with missiles designed to intercept incoming threats from the air, the surface, and beneath the waves. These ships form a layered defense, creating overlapping zones where any incoming threat must survive multiple engagement opportunities before reaching the carrier. But here is the trade-off that few people discuss. This defensive posture requires the strike group to radiate electromagnetic energy. Radar systems must be active to detect threats. Communication links must remain open to coordinate responses, and every emission creates a signature that an adversary can detect, track, and potentially exploit. Now consider the Russian perspective. For decades, Soviet and later Russian naval doctrine has focused on one central problem. How do you neutralize an American carrier strike group? The answer they developed was not subtle, it was overwhelming. The concept is sometimes called a saturation attack. The idea is to launch so many missiles simultaneously that the defensive systems simply cannot intercept them all. Even if 90% are shot down, the remaining 10% could still deliver catastrophic damage. But executing a saturation attack requires getting close enough to launch, and that is where the real challenge begins. Modern anti-ship missiles have impressive ranges, some exceeding several hundred miles. Yet range on paper does not translate directly to range in practice. To launch a missile at a target beyond the horizon, you first need to know exactly where that target is. You need targeting data, and acquiring that data against a defended carrier strike group is one of the hardest problems in naval warfare. This brings us back to that hypothetical morning in the North Atlantic. According to this scenario, a Russian surface combatant, possibly a frigate or destroyer from the Northern Fleet, began approaching the outer edge of the carrier strike group's detection envelope. The ship was not attempting to hide. In fact, it was doing the opposite. Its radar systems were active. Its fire control systems were radiating. It was announcing its presence to everyone within hundreds of miles. Now, this is where the ocean lies to you. What appears aggressive on the surface might actually be something else entirely. Surface ships operating alone against a carrier strike group face nearly impossible odds. A single frigate, no matter how advanced its missiles, cannot survive the combined defensive firepower of an entire strike group. Any competent naval commander knows this, so why would a Russian captain sail directly towards certain destruction? The answer reveals the true nature of modern naval confrontation. That ship was not the weapon. It was the sensor. By approaching the strike group and forcing the American ships to react, the Russian vessel was gathering invaluable intelligence. Every radar emission from the American destroyers told the Russians something about frequency, pulse characteristics, and scan patterns. Every communication intercept revealed something about coordination procedures. Every maneuver disclosed something about doctrine and response times. But the Americans knew this game too, and they had been playing it for a very long time. The moment the Russian ship was detected, the strike group commander faced a decision tree that has been refined through decades of experience. The first option was to ignore the approach entirely, maintaining course and speed, while monitoring the contact passively. This would deny the Russians the reactive emissions they were seeking, but it would also allow them to get closer, potentially close enough to launch missiles before defensive systems could respond effectively. The second option was to illuminate the approaching ship with fire control radar, sending an unmistakable signal that weapons were ready to engage. This is the naval equivalent of drawing your weapon and pointing it at someone. It escalates tension dramatically, but also forces the other side to make a choice. Just continue approaching and risk destruction, or turn away and admit that the provocation has failed. The third option, and this is where things get interesting, was to use the confrontation as an opportunity. If the Russians wanted intelligence on American systems, perhaps the Americans could use the same encounter to gather intelligence on Russian capabilities. The electromagnetic spectrum works both ways. Every Russian radar emission could be captured, analyzed, and cataloged for future reference. According to this hypothetical scenario, the American commander chose a fourth option that combined elements of all three. The carrier strike group split into two elements. The main body, centered on the carrier, turned away and increased speed, opening the distance from the approaching Russian ship. Meanwhile, a single destroyer peeled off from the formation and moved to intercept, placing itself directly between the Russian vessel and the retreating carrier. This maneuver accomplished several things simultaneously. It protected the carrier while avoiding the appearance of retreat. It provided a platform for close observation of the Russian ship without risking the entire strike group. And it sent a message. The Americans were not afraid, but they were also not going to play the game on Russian terms. Now, here is the moment that changed everything. As the American destroyer closed to within visual range of the Russian frigate, something unexpected happened. The Russian ship suddenly increased speed and altered course, turning directly toward the destroyer, rather than continuing toward the carrier. For a brief moment, the two warships were on a collision course. In the confined waters of a shipping lane or near a coastline, this kind of aggressive maneuvering happens occasionally. Ships play chicken, testing each other's nerve and seamanship. But in the open ocean, far from any territorial waters, this was different. This was a deliberate attempt to create a crisis. The American captain had seconds to decide. Maintaining course would mean either a collision or forcing the Russian ship to turn away at the last moment. Turning away would concede the confrontation and potentially invite further aggression. Neither option was good, but in naval warfare you often have to choose between bad options and worse ones. What the American commander did next demonstrated why experience matters more than technology in these situations. Instead of turning away or maintaining course, the destroyer executed a maneuver that naval officers call crossing the T. The ship turned sharply, presenting its broadside to the oncoming Russian vessel, while simultaneously illuminating it with every sensor system available. This put all of the destroyer's weapons in position to engage while also flooding the Russian ship with electromagnetic energy. The message was clear. You want a confrontation? Here it is. Every weapon we have is now pointed at you. What happens next is your choice. For a long moment, according to this scenario, nothing happened. The two ships continued closing, the distance shrinking from miles to thousands of yards. On the bridge of the American destroyer, sailors watched the Russian vessel through binoculars, looking for any sign of hostile intent. Missile launchers remained trained. Fire control systems held their lock. The only sound was the hum of electronics and the beating of hearts. Then the Russian ship turned away. But this is where the story takes its unexpected turn. The confrontation on the surface was never the real threat. While every eye and every sensor was focused on the Russian frigate, something else was happening beneath the waves. And this is the part that Moscow did not expect anyone to notice. Submarine warfare operates on completely different rules than surface combat. On the surface, everything happens in real time. You see a ship, you track it, you engage it. Underwater, the primary sense is hearing, not sight. Submarines detect each other through sound, and sound in the ocean behaves in strange and complicated ways. Water temperature affects how sound waves propagate. Salinity changes the speed of sound. Underwater terrain creates echoes and shadows. A submarine captain must think in 3 dimensions, constantly calculating where to position his boat to hear without being heard. The Russian Northern Fleet operates some of the most advanced attack submarines in the world. These boats are designed specifically to hunt American carrier strike groups. They are quiet, capable, and armed with weapons that pose a genuine threat to surface ships. And according to this hypothetical scenario, while the surface confrontation was playing out, at least one Russian submarine was attempting to penetrate the defensive perimeter of the strike group. This is standard doctrine. The surface ship acts as a distraction, drawing attention and forcing the Americans to radiate emissions that the submarine can use for targeting. Meanwhile, the submarine creeps closer, using the acoustic chaos of the confrontation as cover for its approach. If everything goes according to plan, the submarine reaches a firing position without ever being detected. The first warning the Americans get is the sound of torpedo screws in the water, but the Americans have been practicing this game for even longer than the Russians. Anti-submarine warfare is arguably the most difficult and most important mission the United States Navy performs. Entire careers are dedicated to understanding how to find and track submarines that are specifically designed to be invisible. The technology involved is classified at the highest levels, but the basic principles are well understood. Yet passive sonar systems listen for any sound that might indicate a submarine. Active sonar sends out pulses of sound and listens for echoes, but using active sonar also reveals your own position. The trade-off is always the same. To see better, you must accept being seen. To stay hidden, you must accept being partially blind. According to this scenario, the carrier strike group was not operating alone. Maritime patrol aircraft, specifically the P-8A Poseidon, were conducting continuous sweeps around the formation. These aircraft carry sophisticated sensor systems, including sonobuoys, small devices that can be dropped into the water to listen for submarine activity across a wide area. By deploying dozens of sonobuoys in a pattern around the strike group, the aircraft create a temporary surveillance network that is extremely difficult for submarines to penetrate undetected. But even this is not the whole picture. Somewhere beneath the waves, American attack submarines were also operating, providing an invisible inner layer of defense that surface sensors cannot match. These submarines communicate with the carrier strike group through carefully coordinated procedures that minimize the risk of detection. Their presence is often unknown even to many of the sailors in the strike group itself. They are the silent guardians, watching for threats that surface ships cannot see. Now here's the part that explains why this hypothetical confrontation ended the way it did. As the Russian submarine attempted to approach the carrier strike group under cover of the surface distraction, it made a mistake. The exact nature of the mistake is impossible to know in this scenario, but submarines are ultimately operated by human beings, and human beings make errors under pressure. Perhaps a pump malfunctioned. Perhaps the submarine went too shallow and its periscope or antenna briefly broke the surface. Perhaps it simply moved through a thermal layer that carried its acoustic signature farther than expected. Whatever happened, the submarine was detected. Not by the surface ships, not by the maritime patrol aircraft, but by the American attack submarine that had been shadowing it for the past several hours. This is the ultimate nightmare for a submarine captain. Being tracked by another submarine means you have already lost. You cannot run because submarines are slow. You cannot hide, because your tracker already knows where you are. You cannot fight because the first submarine to shoot in an underwater duel usually wins, and your opponent already has the advantage. The Russian submarine commander now faced an impossible choice. Continue the approach and risk being destroyed by an enemy he could not even locate. Or abandon the mission and withdraw, admitting failure without ever having fired a shot. According to this scenario, the Russian commander chose survival over glory. The submarine turned away from the carrier strike group and began its retreat toward deeper water. But the Americans were not finished. What happened next was a demonstration of capability that sent a message far louder than any weapon could. The American attack submarine that had been tracking the Russian boat did something extraordinary. On its surface, not near the Russian submarine, but directly in the path of its retreat. It rose from the depths in full view of Russian reconnaissance satellites, allowing itself to be photographed and identified. The message was unmistakable. "We see you. We have always seen you. And we chose to let you go." This time. For Moscow, this was a devastating revelation. The entire operation had been designed to probe American defenses and gather intelligence on their reaction patterns. Instead, the Russians had learned that their most advanced submarine had been tracked from the moment it left its base. Every movement had been monitored. Every tactic had been anticipated. The acoustic signature that was supposed to make these submarines invisible had already been compromised. The implications extended far beyond this single confrontation. If the Americans could track one Yasin-class submarine, they could potentially track them all. The entire Russian undersea deterrent, the force that Moscow relies upon to ensure its survival in a nuclear conflict, might be vulnerable in ways that Russian planners had not considered. This is the hidden dimension of naval power that rarely makes headlines. The fleets that countries show to the world, the aircraft carriers and guided missile destroyers, are only part of the equation. Beneath the surface, invisible and unacknowledged, another contest plays out continuously. Submarines hunt each other through the darkness, probing for weaknesses, testing defenses, gathering the intelligence that might prove decisive if conflict ever comes. The surface confrontation that began this scenario, the Russian frigate sailing aggressively toward the American carrier strike group, was never meant to achieve a military victory. No competent commander would expect a single surface ship to defeat an entire carrier strike group. The real objective was always intelligence. Force the Americans to react, record their emissions, map their procedures, feed that information to the submarines that would execute the real attack if war ever came. But the Americans understood this game. They had been playing it since the Cold War, refining their techniques across decades of cat-and-mouse encounters with Soviet and Russian forces. The carrier strike group did not just defend itself. It used the confrontation as an opportunity to gather its own intelligence, to demonstrate capabilities that the Russians did not know existed, and to send a message about the true balance of power beneath the waves. Now consider what this means for the broader strategic picture. Russia has invested enormous resources in modernizing its submarine fleet precisely because surface ships cannot challenge American naval dominance directly. The logic was sound. If you cannot win on the surface, fight underwater where the playing field is more even. But this hypothetical scenario suggests that even underwater, the advantage may have shifted further than Moscow realized. The technology involved in anti-submarine warfare is among the most closely guarded secrets any nation possesses. What sensors can detect? What sounds submarines make? What techniques work and which have been defeated? Even this information is classified at levels that make nuclear weapon designs look almost public by comparison. Neither side reveals its true capabilities except in carefully controlled demonstrations designed to send specific messages. What message was sent in this hypothetical scenario? The Americans demonstrated that they could detect and track Russia's most advanced attack submarine without the Russian crew even knowing they were being watched. They demonstrated that their own submarines could operate within the Russian defensive perimeter and surface at will. And they demonstrated that even an aggressive surface provocation would not distract them from the underwater threat that mattered far more. For the Russian military, this presents a strategic dilemma with no easy solution. Their doctrine assumes that submarines can approach American carrier strike groups undetected and launch devastating attacks. If that assumption is wrong, their entire naval strategy requires fundamental revision. But testing that assumption means risking their most valuable assets in confrontations where the Americans hold information advantage. The ocean keeps its secrets well. We may never know exactly what capabilities each side truly possesses, what sensors work, and what countermeasures have been developed. But encounters like this hypothetical scenario provide glimpses into a hidden world of competition that continues every day, far from public attention, beneath the waves of every ocean on Earth. What happens next in this great power competition? That depends on choices that have not yet been made. Russia could accept the message and focus its resources elsewhere. Or it could double down, investing in new technologies and new tactics designed to restore the underwater advantage it thought it possessed. The Americans, meanwhile, must consider whether demonstrating their capabilities so openly was wise, or whether it will simply drive their adversaries to develop countermeasures that erase whatever edge currently exists. This is the nature of military competition. Every advantage is temporary. Every secret eventually becomes known. The winner is not the side with the best technology today, but the side that adapts fastest to the changing conditions tomorrow. In your assessment, what matters more in this underwater competition? Is it the sensors that detect, the weapons that destroy, or the political will that decides when and how to use them? The answer may determine who controls the oceans in the decades to come. The confrontation described in this scenario ended without a shot being fired. But in many ways, that makes it more significant, not less. Wars are won or lost based on calculations made before the first missile launches. If one side believes it can succeed, it may take risks that lead to conflict. If that same side understands that its advantages are illusory, it may choose a different path entirely. The underwater competition between great powers continues today in ways that will never appear in any news report. Submarines patrol silently through the depth, watching and listening, gathering the information that will determine outcomes in any future conflict. The side that understands this hidden battlefield best will hold an advantage that no number of surface ships can match. And that is perhaps the most important lesson of this scenario. In modern naval warfare, the decisive weapons are often the ones you never see. The platforms that matter most are the ones that operate in silence, far from the cameras and the headlines. And the victories that count are measured not in ships sunk, but in secrets kept and advantages preserved. This video is for educational purposes only, based on publicly available information and hypothetical analysis. It is not operational advice and should not be used to plan harm or wrongdoing.